Your company's future success demands agile, flexible, and resilient operations. I'm your host, Christian Johnson, and you're listening to McKinsey Talks Operations, a podcast where the world's C-suite leaders and McKinsey experts cut through the noise and uncover how to create a new operational reality. With so much focus lately on geopolitical uncertainties, it's easy to overlook one of the most important factors compressing operating margins: the rising cost of emissions as new regulations come into force. An alphabet soup of rules are now in effect, including Europe's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, and the European Trading Scheme, or ETS, with tighter carbon reporting standards taking hold in countries ranging from Canada and the UK to India and Japan. These changes have implications throughout operations. Companies are now committed to major investments, sourcing low-carbon materials, redesigning components and products, and even building entirely new value chains based on recycling products at a product's end of life. This is all part of making carbon-informed decisions, yet at the same time, companies still face the same competitive pressures as ever to keep costs low. Some are proving that it's possible to do both, reducing cost and carbon in what we call a dual mission program. For today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Matthias Ballweg, CEO and co-founder of Circular Republic. Hello, Matthias.
Hello.
And I'm also pleased to be joined by two McKinsey experts, Anna-Christina Fredershausen, an associate partner in McKinsey's Frankfurt office. Hi, Anna. Anna-Christina.
Hi, Christian.
And Johan Bengtsson, a partner in our Stockholm office. Hi, Johan.
Hey, Christian.
So let's dive right in. Anna-Christina, could you please explain why decarbonization is relevant now, even or perhaps especially in times of geopolitical tensions?
Sure, happy to. If we look at it from an European angle, Draghi, for example, has announced decarbonization as one of the three core pillars to ensure Europe's competitiveness going forward. At the same time, if we look at some of the industries where Europe is leading, for example, clean tech, we do see that there's increasing competition from outside of Europe. So it's really important to stay ahead here.
Thank you, Anna-Christina. And maybe I can add to that, especially for Europe. This is a topic right now because resilience is rising more and more. We realize currently in Europe as a continent that we are almost 100% dependent on imports when it comes to energy, all kinds of fossil energy at least. But also when it comes to material, and material is also at least the source for more than 50% of all emissions. And for materials, it's even much harder to decarbonize than for classic energy, at least for most sectors. So it's quite a challenge now to build the capabilities quickly. But also the good side is that more and more rationale is coming up how to realize this dual mission as also a business case. For example, every 1.4 years, we currently have a value chain crisis, some disruption of the value chain, a ship standing in the Suez Channel. Some might remember crowd of ships in front of Shanghai Harbor during Corona. All this is causing major disruptions, and these disruptions cost. Cargo helicopters need to fly in to keep production of European automotive ongoing, and obviously that comes with costs. And this is more and more seen and quantified by companies. And by that, you even do get short-term business cases, at least with a payback of 1 to 2 years already for some measures that really pay into decarbonization and also dematerialization.
That's great. Thank you, Matthias. And Anna-Christina, you talk about carbon as a fully integrated topic in the European Union's overall position, as well as its company's cost basis. Why is that?
If you think about decarbonization amidst all of the other topics that are currently ongoing and are top of mind, I think decarbonization is still something that you need to look at and that you need to look at as an integrated business case, given that with all of the upcoming regulations, you basically cannot ignore the topic. There will be upcoming costs for the majority of the companies that are operating in Europe. And the way to think about it is really, on the one hand, to mitigate cost, and on the other hand, also see the potential upside and investigate whether there are any potential business opportunities coming out of that, and how to use certain topics such as circularity, for example, to also make a positive, viable business opportunity out of it.
Thanks for bringing us up to speed on that, Anna-Christina. I feel like this sounds challenging and maybe even scary to some companies out there, but I know it can also be turned into a real opportunity. Johan, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, very happy to, Christian. I think you can look at this from a couple of different angles as a company. I think if you look at the landscape of opportunities, what you can do to decarbonize out there, and of course it varies by industry, but if you look at the levers that you can pull, many of those are what we would call in the money, essentially that they are lowering cost and carbon at the same time. So it's true win-win. And then there are some that are probably more cost neutral, and there are clearly some where we do need to take significant investments. And having that understanding, you can really start acting on the quote unquote low-hanging fruit or the in the money type of levers now to gain real momentum on both improving your EBITDA as a company, but also to really make a step change on decarbonization journey. And then, of course, if you look at it more from the lens of a offensive play, a little bit as Anna-Christina was also into earlier, there are signs in several industries of potential green premia where you can essentially charge and it could build brand position and strengthen your brand overall. And I think acting on this now gives an advantage with all the upcoming regulation that will also come in more and more to play, that you have a stronger position, which also then subsequently will put yourself in a more competitive position vis-a-vis your competitors.
That sounds like a really great opportunity, but I guess that begs the question on how to set yourself up for success on this journey. Johan, I know you've worked extensively in this space for many years, helping numerous clients across industries. Could you please share some of the insights you've garnered along the way? Is there some sort of a secret recipe, a secret source for success here?
I think there are probably some harder facts into this and some more softer facts into it as well. I think what has excited me over the past years a lot when working with this is the excitement that it builds in the organization among the employees around working on something that is truly meaningful for the broader world and for the broader environment, but at the same time also really help improving the business position of the company and improving results and financials. I think the approach that we typically take here is quite simple recipe in the end. It's about integrating the work around decarbonization and carbon into the daily business. So that means basically, first of all, understanding where does the emission come from, what are the different steps, what are the drivers behind it, which is similarly, so if you would need to understand and address your cost level, you also need to understand the drivers of cost. In the same way, you need to understand where does the carbon come from. And then by having that transparency, then, okay, what are the different actions I can take to change here? Generating ideas. If it talks, for instance, upstream is more type of emissions, what are the different materials I can source? How can I design my products in a different way using more circular material, less emissive material? And then it's about execution, where if that is then a commercial lever, meaning that you need to work or redesign your supply chain, so working closely with your suppliers on this, or working with your engineers in the implementation or redesign of your products. So it's almost a bit like a 3-step model, which follows very much the logic of how we traditionally would have worked with cost, but you're adding an additional lens and bringing that into the overall business. And then therefore also you allow yourself to almost triangulate of what are the different trade-offs I do where and when.
Thanks, Johan. Zooming out now, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about how this fits into an overall transformation and what sorts of changes companies must undergo to succeed with all of this. So, Anna-Christina, since you kicked us off with the Draghi report, which connects decarbonization to a wider European transformation in a similar way, maybe you could elaborate on this topic a bit for us.
Sure, happy to. If we think about what companies now can do to really operationalize this more overarching topic of decarbonization that Draghi put as one of the core 3 pillars, I think it's really about integrating it fully into the business and into, for example, an end-to-end cost out program. So topics that companies could look at to think about decarbonization in a way that it is in the money, so to speak, is, for example, sourcing or design to value levers, where you basically add a carbon cost and the cost blends. So previously you would have had only the cost lens. Now you add the carbon lens, but also, of course, with a financial perspective. And basically what you're aiming to do is to reduce costs and carbon both at once. And if you first create basically your baseline of emissions and then look at what can I do to reduce my overall emissions, you would then prioritize the levers that are in the money where you basically save cost and carbon at the same time. Of course, that needs quite a granular bottom-up plan. So you would need to look at it in detail across the different products that you're having and across the different material groups, for example, that you're sourcing for. And then, of course, also just take a decision for each individual material and also each individual product, because it will differ depending on the overall composition.
And Matthias, what would you add here?
I agree to everything what is said by Anna-Christina, but I want to add the point that this is also around talent. If you ask yourself, whom would you put on that project to do all that? Design to cost, the granular bottom-up plan that reduces cost and emissions, run that program. What's the person to put there? And also from a young talent point of view, which project would you ask for in order to make a good career in your company? Is it the next cost-cutting program? Is it reconfiguring sales? Or is it that dual mission carbon accounting project? And that's also partly a mindset question and also how that is positioned in the board. If you want to make sure that this is successful, you need to make sure this is attractive. If people within the company have the feeling that running such a program successfully, that's what makes you a board member in the end. That's the spirit you want to have. Knowing how to combine cost cutting and carbon, knowing how to reconfigure value chains, talking to the right suppliers to work with less virgin material, get the benefits out of it, build the value chains accordingly. That's quite something you need to learn, or at least also something where you can be good at or not so good at. And that's critical that as a company, you invest in the talents that drive this and signal that there is a career to be made in driving dual mission projects.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matthias. And thank you, Anna-Christina, as well. Johan, moving on, once companies have set their baseline and integrated decarbonization into their transformation strategy, what are the critical steps they need to follow to move from transparency into action?
It's an excellent question. I think here it's very much about really understanding the potential actions you can take. What are the different levers you can pull, and what implications do those lever actions have on the overall business case? What of those cost money? What of those are in the money? What of those have implications on performance of the product? What of those have implications on customer value in any other way? And setting a granular plan on what do I do when, and set the implementation strategy around this, meaning how do I go to the suppliers? When do I go to the suppliers? How do I work with internal stakeholders to potentially changing requirements, redesigning of the products? And typically, we usually talk about this as a couple of different steps where you first essentially set the value, meaning you size the potential impact and all the different implications of the actions. You set the plan, creating the action plan in what order, when, and how do I do it? And then it's essentially about acting, really driving towards implementation. And I think Matthias made an excellent point here earlier regarding talent and insights and understanding and experience in this. How do you build that? Because all of these things, while, as mentioned earlier, has clear analogies or similarities to how we work with cost or other type of performance efforts in companies historically, it also comes with a new set of information and a new set of steps or points that you need to either discuss with your suppliers or convincing internal stakeholders around. And that is super important to really get traction on this over time.
Thanks, Johan. So it's about finding the value, making a plan, and then acting on it to implement that strategy. Anna-Christina, you've been working with various clients on this. There also must be a mindset shift happening as industry decarbonizes, right? How have you seen companies responding to this new reality?
A few years ago, a lot of companies spelled out ambitious decarbonization targets. And there is this initiative, it's called Science-Based Targets Initiative, so in short, SBTI, where you basically use a uniform language and nomenclature to define targets and make sure that everybody speaks about the same level of emissions when they set targets, and they are aligned basically with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And looking at those so-called SBTI targets, we can see that while they have been quite ambitious in the past, a few companies are now postponing them or reducing them a bit. I think what we can also see is that at the same time, they are really looking at decarbonization measures that are more in the money and that really help them to, on the one hand, mitigate cost that is upcoming due to regulation, as well as using the opportunity to make a business out of it. And I think both Matthias and Johan made a great point about that you need an integrated group basically working on this topic, and it cannot be a separate group that works on decarbonization while the rest works on the regular business. So what you can see now is also as a mindset shift that it is being integrated in the overall business. Just if we take procurement, for example, as one function, you can see that whereas for traditional supplier selection a few years back, carbon might not have been one of the decision factors. Now carbon often is part of the selection process, and it is one of the factors that suppliers are being asked for.
Matthias, can you share any real-life examples that you have seen in your work?
Absolutely. And just adding to your point, Anna-Christina, and the reason why it's part of the selection is not only some sustainability mindset, but it's also more and more upcoming regulation, and the fact that if I work with suppliers who are solely basing their own value chains on fossil-based energy, for example, there is a much higher likelihood that they'll become more expensive. They'll be unable to deliver, that they'll be taxed in a higher way and so on. And there is also a business risk in investing those suppliers. You asked me for an example, Christian. We at Circular Republic are working on circular economy projects, so with the material side of things, more than with the energy side of things. And what we see there is that if you look in the materials, which is for many companies, the scope 3, the emissions you bring into your company, because with some energy, the material is mined and refined somewhere upstream. There are a lot of cases where people realize they can change something by working on the material footprint, and which is directly reducing the scope 3 emissions. One example, Lawrence is a company from Germany who is building water meters. Water meters, these are these brass bowls with some electronics inside that are in the bottom cellar of every house and meter how much volume, how many gallons or cubic meters of water are flowing into the house. And this company was producing them and selling them and was really struggling at some point because brass prices are keeping to increase, which is an absolute cost challenge. And they were thinking, how can I decrease those brass prices? And we're thinking about the lever of recycled material. And when you look at it and start with it, recycled material first is maybe even more expensive. It takes quite some effort to make sure quality is fine and so on. But if you start the journey and go a little bit further, you realize measures how to mitigate that. And they found talents and capabilities. They took it serious. It was a CEO topic again. Who really started calling all the major plumbers, asking them to deliver the material back, finding mechanisms how this is done at quality. Because at first, no real high quality material came back, only poor quality material. But once they allowed the plumbers to send back everything, even the non-Lawrence components, but also other components, then they really received all the materials. And then they started building the grading capabilities. If something comes back, can I put it to the shredder and get some good recycled content from it? Or can I really even reuse it? And then they started to put that into that insight into product design as well. And now they're 15 years in the game with that strategy. And only since a few years, by the way, they really call it a decarbonization or a circular economy strategy as well. Before that, it was around securing the business, also about digitalization, by the way. Now they're tracking all their meters, mostly saying smart meters by now. So summarizing what Lawrence did was decreasing their material footprint, and by that, obviously decreasing their emission footprint. And the most interesting thing is that the profits went up by a factor of 8 because obviously they had less costs, and also revenue went up because they became kind of famous for their approach and now had even higher quality. So I think Lawrence is a good example for the dual mission.
That's an excellent example. Thank you so much, Matthias. Great to have an example of something that we all have in our homes as well. And Matthias, we've all seen examples where things might have been smaller, the materials might be made a bit thinner. So now, how valuable are those kinds of examples in this pursuit of the dual mission of cost and carbon reductions?
Ideally, these incremental examples are not the ones one brings forward as the prime example, at least. It's all good and it's all great if companies really make sure something gets a little bit thinner and by that also a little bit less emissions. But the real art is to rethink your value chain in a way that by doing more business, you also pursue your mission. And if you do something just a little bit thinner and you double your business, you'll still have almost double emission, just not full double emissions. And examples like Lawrence are the ones that really started reconfiguring their value chain. And now they are at a meter as a service business model. And with every additional meter they bring out, they reduce the materials overall use because someone is not buying a meter. Again, they're basically renting out the meters now. And while both is needed, I think it's important if you bring forward examples just to raise ambition and make sure that people can be ambitious and inspired about these dual missions. Ideally, it's those that really went even into their business model.
I love that thought about raising ambition and not just making incremental improvements. So thank you. And Johan, anything that you would add here? I've heard you talk previously about changes to the points in the value chain at which you're assessing cost and carbon reduction. Is there anything that you would add here about the opportunities?
I think what we have seen over doing this with many clients across industries is there are so many exciting examples of actions that has really proven to be true dual mission. There are cases ranges from pretty bold changes of materials or specification or requirements, even companies changing material visibly to the customer and capitalizing on that in the marketing and brand building. But there are also many examples where, based on the facts and the transparency that we spoke about earlier, how you can go down in your value chain and find better from a carbon emission perspective and still cheaper or at the same cost alternatives that has significant difference on the end footprint of a specific product, but actually doesn't really change the product itself. Simply by sticking to the same requirements, but further down in the value chain, moving to, if it's a tier 2 or a tier 3 supplier, with one with access to different type of energy, how you can really make step change and really achieve both metrics at the same time, meaning cost and carbon.
So, Anna-Christina, can you say just a little bit more about what dual mission could be? What's the real potential here?
I think there's a few examples that we could name. On the one hand, it's of course more on the commercial side, where you're basically negotiating with the current suppliers as well as potential new suppliers to really make sure that you get, for example, carbon reduced material. On the other hand, it's about thinking about the product from a holistic perspective. So really thinking about design shifts and features optimization. So can we alter the product in a way that is beneficial to the customers by reducing carbon at the same time? And then another angle that I'd like to add is around recycling and circularity, where basically you can think about designing the product in a way that is recyclable and at the same time also think about how can I increase the share of my recycled material. And then the fifth point is all about energy efficiency, where basically one of the angles could be, can I change my manufacturing process, or can I use a different supplier with a more efficient manufacturing process, or a different energy source, which is more sustainable.
So thank you so much, Matthias, Anna-Christina, and Johan, for sharing your insights. It's clear that the journey to net zero is going to be a full enterprise-wide task that requires close collaboration across functions and a significant shift in mindset as well. That wraps up today's episode of McKinsey Talks Operations. We hope you found it informative and actionable. Remember, the path to decarbonization is complex, but with the right strategies and mindset, it's achievable. Thank you for listening. Another great episode starts now.